Welcome back to New Realities, and I'm so happy that this guest tonight is joining us for one of my favorite subjects. Bernie Beitman has just written a very important book on meaningful coincidences and how and why synchronicity and serendipity happens. And if you've been watching this program, I'll find it on there on the screen.
And there it is back there, because it's
and
getting
there it is. Coincidentally,
coincident. It's getting kind of blurry the way you were, because of your background.
I know.
Thing.
I have to take off my backdrop. But anyway, thanks so much for writing what I feel is the best book on the subject. And
thank you very much, Alan.
Because it's something, when a coincidence or a synchronicity happens, it's as if magic has appeared in our world. I mean, you go and you explain probabilities and likelihoods, but can you really get away from the magic that you feel when some of the stories that you tell in the book, when you knew the woman had asked her yoga teacher something and you didn't know? Do you want to go through that story? That's a really interesting story.
Yeah, that's a meta coincidence. That's one of my favorite concepts that I hadn't seen before, where one coincidence comments on another. And I like to go to dance, and it's the dance I go to is usually called Five Rhythms, or some kind of free movement kind of thing, where you can do whatever you want. Ecstatic dance, I like the sound of that. Yeah. And I went to I go almost twice a week, and I met somebody there that we had a great dance with. We really knew how to feel each other's energy, and that's where I really know that interpersonal energy is real. That's how I can feel it. It changes on the dance floor. So she and I had some good movements together, and then one day before,
you never met her before. She was like someone.
I'd met her at dance. We danced a couple of times before. We had. Okay. So, and thank you. That's an important part of it. And we'd had some really nice dances together. Her name was E.L. And I was talking to Elle in the room outside where the dance was. And before we get to that part of it, that's just to lead to Elle, that I go to our local health foods place, Rebecca's, and I end up talking to the guy who's the manager, and he finds out that I'm interested in coincidence, and so is he. So he tells me about a friend of his who went to yoga with a question. What's a line in a Rumi poem that she was missing? She knew the beginning of it, but she didn't know the second line. And so she was so amazed, this guy told me, that she was able to hear her yoga teacher say that last line. So she got an answer to her question. And that's a very meaningful coincidence for her, because she was looking for it. Well, then the next day was Valentine's Day, and it was a Sunday at dance. And I asked her when we're sitting out there, "Oh, how was your Valentine's Day?" As she asked me. And she said, "Well, I went to yoga, and the yoga teacher told us the answer to a question that I'd had, and I told her what that line was, because." And she
told her the Rumi line that you weren't even there. You had no.
Wasn't there. I just got it from the manager at the Rebecca's, and so she was amazed. Well, it just turned out
it could have been another person in another yoga center asking another question, right?
It could have been, and probably was. What you're saying there is really important. That just because one person does it doesn't mean nobody else is doing it. It means, yes, somebody else is probably doing it, coming to yoga with a question like that.
But I just want to say the more important thing was I'm sensing you had a feeling that this was you just didn't throw it out because she went to you knew there was a part of you that knew this was the person,
Hey,
right?
thanks for emphasizing that one, Alan. Yeah, there was no question in my mind that I knew it was her, and I didn't know that she knew the guy at Rebecca's either. I didn't know that. I found out later that they worked together, but I didn't know that at all. But when she said that, it had to be you, it had to be her, and it had to be that line. And thanks for bringing that up, because it's knowing without knowing is so much an important part of helping coincidences happen. We have abilities.
Yes. Yes.
And they emerge like that.
We have abilities. I teach remote viewing, and it's very much about that same part of these abilities to know we're more than just this limited being in time and space. I know you go through a series of explanations, and I think it's great how you go from the divinity of God made this happen to like, oh, it's just all random, and you talk about the psychology or the consciousness in between that, but there's still, and maybe you do say, because I actually didn't finish the book, I read most of it, but it still doesn't explain how exactly. I mean, you cover the logical, but I'll give you one. I'm I'm out to dinner with a friend, and he's a friend for a while, but he hardly ever comes to my apartment. But he comes up to my apartment because he wants a book that I have. And while he's in the apartment, I get a call, and they say, "Is this guy Ted?" And with this last name there, I say, "No, but Michael with this last name is here." And I put him on the phone, and it ends out to be a relative he hasn't talked to, but it's because the relative mixed up the last two numbers of the phone call she was trying to make, and she got my phone. It was a accidental call to my number while this guy was sitting in my apartment, who happened to be a relative of his just at that moment. And do you follow this story?
I've had two other stories very much like that.
Oh.
One of them is this guy walking by a phone booth back in the old days, a teenager,
Right.
and he should be home now. And the phone rings as he and his friends walking by, and his friend answers the phone, and the friend gives him the phone. "It's your mother asking for you."
How did she call the phone booth?
It was a wrong number.
Wrong number. That's happened in my case. A wrong number that happened to you.
And then I have a couple others that are like that. It's really, it's how does that happen? It's a little bit like the remote viewing you're talking about, that we know things happening out there someplace in ways we don't really understand. And if you want to, I'd love to talk with you about the latter part of the book, where I talk about the psychosphere and a way to explain some of these weird events.
Yeah, do that, because the only theory I came up with after, 20 or 30 years of having synchronicities and coincidences, and sort of taken from what Jung, is that there's this kind of serpent of time and consciousness that is always happening. Synchronicities are always happening, but when it raises its head, boom, that's when we see it. And of course, you say in the book, the more you're aware of it, the more it happens. But yeah, go through the last part of the book and tell us the psychosphere, what that means.
Well, thank you for the serpent of time, because you've gotten me off on something else. We'll come back to it. But the serpent of time has a spiral form to it, or not it's let me call it a sine wave form to it. That's what you just described. But in three dimensions, a sine wave, a helix is a spiral that, if you cut it down the middle, has with it a sine wave. And then if you just take part of the sine wave, you get a normal curve. And the normal curve, the normal curve is a description of a lot of the way normal things distribute in our reality. Not all of it. There's other curves.
You know why? Because I studied Chinese medicine. That's the way qi flows. chi doesn't flow in a straight line. The meandering of rivers is the natural movement of energy in this universe. It's that curvy line. That's how energy actually moves.
Oh,
So
that's
maybe
true. That's
yeah.
true. I mean, you know that from just light waves.
Yeah.
Light waves move the same way. And I move the same way emotionally. I mean, I go through this thing like, oh, I sent out this email and this person didn't call me back after being excited with my email. And then I'm down like this. I say, okay, I'm doing the sine wave. What happens after I do the sine wave? It levels out
Right.
in this case. So it's a natural part. This spiral or this snake movement is a description of the way reality works in 2 dimensions, 3 dimensions, and 1 dimension. So that's
maybe 4 dimensions as
go
well,
ahead.
if we want.
But tell me 4 dimensions. Stretch
4
my
dimensions
mind.
of hyperspace. It's beyond the 3D, but it seems to be happening in a place that condenses time space in a whole different format. And actually, 4th dimensional hyperdimensionality may be a key to synchronicity. It's hard. You can have a description of a 4-dimensional hypercube that is spinning where you don't, it will spin, but you will not see the side that's supposed to see. But because we're only seeing it from 3 dimensions, where we can be 4 dimensionals with our kind of quantum awareness or our non-local mind. I think that's how remote viewing works. It works in a place where we're non-local. Let's put it that way. That's what I would say. There's a non-local quality to the mind.
Well, non-local gets me loco sometimes because it means so many different things to people.
No, it's like your phone. If your phone breaks, it doesn't mean you stop getting calls. You go to the cloud, get your calls. It's like your telephone number. It's localized to your phone, but if you don't have your phone working, you can still get calls. That's a non-local aspect.
That's the most practical example I've ever heard.
Right. Well, that's how I understand it. We're using all of that non-local awareness as consciousness, because I think, and we're getting off your subject a little bit, I don't think it's contained in the brain.
It isn't. And that's what we'll get to. But your 4th dimensional, whatever you're trying to draw there, which I had some idea about, and we only see part of it, is metaphorically described in that wonderful 1884 book called Flatland.
Yes, which What the Bleep made a cartoon about. Did you ever see the What the Bleep cartoon of Dr. Quantum Visits Flatland?
I love the Dr. Quantum Visits Flatland. I show it to my grandchildren.
Me too.
It's great. It's great. But the idea was that people live in 2 dimensions and this thing comes through the flat.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And this thing that comes through starts off looking like a point and then becomes a circle and then disappears and then becomes a point again. Mm-hmm. And they got to understand how that happens. It's a sphere going through 2 dimensions. And the guy who says there's another dimension gets put in jail because they couldn't stand it. That's what we got going on with us right now.
Right. They put him in jail because that's only a 2-dimensional being. And then he asked the being from the 3rd dimension, are you some kind of ghost or God? And he goes, no, I'm just in a higher dimension. So I think poltergeists, and we can talk about UFOs a little bit, they come from, I know it's cliche, another dimension, but I think,
what you've seen about my book and others have said, I try to be scientific as best as I can about it, because a new science, which this is, begins with description. And I've tried to describe the range, but not full range, of meaningful coincidence. There's a lot of different versions I keep wanting to hear about. And you're going to tell me about the one that I don't know, the Italian one. You tell me about
the French.
French one. Okay, we'll get to that. But I try to make sense of all this. You know, when you write all that stuff, you get to say, well, this is how I think it happened. So I start from the bottom up, meaning that I played football I played baseball. I had my cleats in the ground. I love stealing bases and making touchdowns. Those are two of my favorite things ever to be able to do. And I try to be able to imagine doing those things, which I was able to do. And I'm doing the same thing now with coincidences, trying to imagine how they work. And I don't want to go to the universe because it's so large. It's so large, Alan. It's too big for my mind to be able to conceptualize. So I want to stay with the confusion that we got here on Earth. It's crazy enough right here. I mean, I was out communicating with a swarm of bugs the other day, and I asked them after a while, we were doing some playing with each other. I like spirals. Would you please do a spiral? And they formed a cylinder and did a spiral for me. So there's a kind of strange, yeah. So those are strange things happening right here. And coincidences are strange things happening right here. So can we explain them as having something to do with closer to Earth than the universe, which is a little hard to explain? So I suggest there is a mental atmosphere that our minds are a part of. We all have this feeling sometimes of being part of something greater. That's something that a greater mind. Now, what is that greater mind? Well, I think the psychosphere or the noosphere, as Tyler D. Chardin labeled it, is complicated enough. It's made up of all the thoughts and emotions that humans have, and that we give those thoughts and emotions into this mental atmosphere, and that we take from them so that we are all thinking some of the same ideas around the same time. It's more conceptual.
But explain that a little bit. So there's this field of consciousness or ideas.
Yeah. And emotion.
And emotion.
Energy, information.
It's not in any place. It's not in one place.
I'm saying it's like our Earth's atmosphere, probably something between the ionosphere and the Earth's crust, just as the Schumann resonance is. The Schumann resonance is a sine wave that goes around the Earth. That's created by lightning, and the basic rhythm of the Schumann resonance is about 7.8 hertz. And it has harmonics that go up to 50 in various lengths, but these harmonics are part of the same movement, just like songs or just like musical instruments can be at different harmonics. These harmonics, 7.8 to about 50 hertz, are just about the same as our EEG range in hertz. So we've grown up in this atmosphere full of sine waves activity that's between the ionosphere and the Earth's crust. So our brains are tuned to this canyon, this hollow area of air and ideas. And I'm suggesting all we're doing is saying as above, so below. So our minds are part of, already by the EEG resemblance to the Schumann resonance, part of this mental atmosphere between the ionosphere and the Earth's crust.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's why certain musical trends are popular at a certain time, and then a kind of move and change to another trend, and everyone's writing great rock and roll songs. You don't hear many great rock and roll songs in 2020s. I mean,
you don't.
They all were taken up in the 60s, 70s, and maybe 80s, but and so the zeitgeist is what I think you're talking about in a sense. Because it's not just the psychosphere or the news sphere, it's also a movement in that sphere that happens, right?
Oh, I'm just describing the territory on which all this happens. No, there is a lot going on in the psychosphere, a lot going on. and what you just described.
Scaring me, Ernie, you're scaring.
I'm scaring you with my deep voice
We'll make a movie called The Psychosphere.
The Psychosphere. Well, to give you an example of that, True Detectives, a TV series, I think on HBO, After I came up with the word psychosphere, the first episode, if you ever look at that, they are talking about, I smell the psychosphere in action. They use the same term. So it's not just music, it's ideas are out there, and there's a term for them, which is for a subset of them, simultaneous independent discoveries.
Right, like the telephone, like the radio, like a million things. And that's because it's in, I would call it the morphogenetic field as well. Have you looked into that?
Of course. The morphogenetic field is, I think, a subset of the psychosphere. I think there's more going on than that, but nature learns and has habits and remembers, as Sheldrake has tried to be able to say. And so these ideas get put out there and they get more easily repeated. I tend to think, though, some of them are relatively original, so they come at the same time, and it's not so much a repetition and a memory, but a thinking together. I'd like to give you an example of that. On March 12th, ladies and gentlemen, 1951, there occurred in the Western world two cartoon characters who were presented in the British Isles and in the United States on that date, March 12th, 1951.
In the British Isles and the United States at the same time.
At the same time. However, I mean, the same name was Dennis the Menace.
Oh.
Dennis the Menace came out in both places at the same time, but the two Dennises and their dogs were a little different. The one in England was a bad boy who purposely caused trouble, and the dog was part of messing things up, while the American one was blonde and blue-eyed, and he and his dog stumbled into problems. They tried to find out if one had stolen ideas from the other. No, they came up with them simultaneously.
Amazing. Well, there's like, did you ever read Charles Fort, the Fortean stuff?
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
He talks about strange coincidences like that, like three different guys named John Smith falling out of the third floor window on the same day, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, so it's like there's these strange energies moving through our psychosphere all the time, and we could be aware of it. It's like, oh, you're John Smith, you better not go near a window that day or something like that. But you know, it's still, for me, it's not satisfactory. I mean, it's a great attempt at an answer, and I don't think there maybe is an answer in our limited way of understanding. Like, if we could control that, can we make synchronicities happen? You talk about making it happen, but in the magical way of picking up a phone and it's your mother, I mean, we don't make that happen. Or talk about how we possibly could make it happen with consciousness, because I think that's a good part of your book.
Well, you just gave an example of thinking of someone and you haven't heard from them for a long time is really the way best one. And that person calls you. Just had an example of a young woman at Alcoholics Anonymous, just really being resentful about her father, the alcoholic, and she was alcoholic too, but recovering. And she read the big book, and she said, well, maybe in the big book it said you got to be like forgiving and understanding. It's like a disease, so you shouldn't be mad at the person who's the alcoholic. So she feels this peace coming over her and a beginning acceptance of her father. And as she's feeling more accepting and thinking God is like making something work for her, her father calls. She hadn't heard from him for years, didn't know he had her phone number, and they became reunited. There, it's that emotion that you were talking about. In order to cover, what is a good explanation, Alan? A good explanation is a good description. And here, emotion and thinking. The psychosphere is emotion and feeling, emotion and ideas and energy. It's both of those, and they ride together just like light waves have energy and information in them. And there's something we have to describe about this. A guy is wants to marry this woman. She wants to marry him, but they both came out of bad marriages, and they were afraid to get together. They were living 2,000 miles away, and they pick up, I think it again was Rumi again, and he picks up Rumi and he's reading it, and he reads a passage that in Rumi that it really drew him. And she says, I'm reading the same page right now, and there's no way you know how that happened. And what blew me out was, like, when they got married, the minister picked that same passage out without them telling him.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
It's all shared mind, is what I'm saying.
I think that's closer to an explanation. It's shared mind, and there's the movement of the zeitgeist through the human collective. And the other part is thoughts are things. I could say in remote viewing, it happens all the time. I'm looking at a target, and people are either getting the target that I'm looking at, or they're actually remote viewing. It's hard to know. But the thoughts are actualities that we can receive, and the feelings are even more powerful than thoughts.
When you say they're actual things, thought forms is another name I think some people give to that. Tell me what you mean by thoughts being actual things.
I'll tell you exactly. When you have a thought, there's like little electrical energy going off in your brain. Well, maybe it doesn't end with your brain. Maybe that energetic, because we are energy, it's like the shift in understanding incarnation is that we're not particles, we're waves, we're not matter, we're energy. It's like, the energy is what is making your body alive. It's not the body, it's the force of whatever that is, energy, life, existence. And we could send that it's hard to describe what energy is because we don't have a clear model of it, but let's just say it's electrical or something like that from your mind to another mind. We can pick that up. I mean, the brain is the most sophisticated instrument, I think, in the human brain in creation. And we are not, this is what I've discovered in teaching remote viewing. The mind is not localized to the brain. And this is the example you use when reading Eben Alexander. You talk about that in your book. He understood, he was a neurosurgeon, like you said, and he didn't believe any of this woo-woo stuff until he was supposedly brain dead and had these incredible adventures. So what's happening there?
Well, Evan lives down the street from me, not too far. I mean,
I think him. He's a great guy.
He's a great guy. I've had him on my program a couple of times. But going back to the thought forms itself, the near-death experience is somewhat beyond what I know well. Not that I haven't studied them and talked with people, but I'm more like with the thought form or the thought idea that you're talking about, because I think that's so important. So what do you think about the idea that we have an etheric mind that is related to the brain, but it's an energy mind around us? It's our mind.
Yeah,
but it's something more than brain.
Well, that's sort of my theory of the non-local consciousness. I think memory is not contained in the physical mind. It's contained, let's say, in the etheric mind. It's contained, instead of the etheric mind, I call it the field, the quantum field. There's a field of energy that doesn't end with our body, and it doesn't actually end with how much it's actually projected into eternity. I mean, maybe it lessens over time, but if I could tune into your energy body and tell you something about that, if I really focus, or anyone could, and that feel that etheric mind is what's non-local. It can travel. It's not localized to time and space. It's what I say. I mean, there's a great quote, I think, in Eben's book. I think I saw it there, where he comes back after his being in the coma for 2 weeks, and he realizes how infinite his mind is. And I think it's a quote from Edgar Cayce where he says, he quotes, "The big question is not how much does consciousness survive the death of the body. The bigger question is how much does that vast consciousness survive the life of the body? Because we're so big, and we have to contain it in this little container, but we're really much more. Does that make sense to you?
Mhm,
You know what I'm
mhm.
saying? We're really much more than we've been, I would say, brainwashed to think. You know, we're not limited in time. We have this etheric mind that is infinite and forever. And maybe it's the thing that reincarnates from lifetime to lifetime. Do you get into reincarnation at all?
Yeah, some. Remember, I'm in Charlottesville, Virginia, and near Division of Perceptual Studies. So they have been able to help me learn some of these ideas, and they've been very supportive of my work with the coincidence thing. There was no place else in the country that would have done it the way they did.
Is that the Rhine Institute? Or
No,
is
that's
that,
a Duke.
oh,
This is part of the University of Virginia. It's the
oh,
only parapsychology place that's part of a university in the United States. And that's where Eben first presented his experiences.
but is that Ian Stevenson's place?
That's
Where?
Ian Stevens's place.
Oh, he's done probably the best work on reincarnation and all that.
Yeah.
You know, Robert Bigelow has a grant to prove. Do you know about that? He
Yeah.
did one grant to prove life after that. Jeffrey Mishlove, your friend. I actually saw you on Mishlove's show, which was great.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
And
he doesn't believe in coincidence. He had one big one in his life, but that's it. He doesn't have any more experiences
how
than that.
could you not believe in coincidence? It
I
happens.
don't know.
I mean,
He
it
had a
happens
big
to me
one.
every day. I'll tell you
This-
what happens to me almost every day. I get about 100 emails a day, and sometimes I get 3 in a row from 3 different people named Susan, and they're all there on my email. Susan this, Susan, or George, right in a row. And I say, that can't be a meaningful, it doesn't really mean anything to me, but it's, I don't know what that's showing, but it happens a lot. And unusual names I get. I can't think, like strange. And there's like 2 in a row with these, you know, 2 people named Twilight who don't know each other, and they're both emailing me on the same day. Help me, Bernie. What does that mean?
Well, it means you're tuned into them and you get a kick out of them. They're kind of like friends who like to make you laugh,
Right.
and that's part of the fun of them. Is that sometimes I get these coincidences. Like I read a lot and write a lot, and so I'm writing something, and then I go read this book about old hippies, for example, and there's that same odd word that I just wrote that's in the book. I mean, I just laugh about those because it's telling me that there's something else, telling you there's something else going on in here about the way our minds are connected with each other.
You know, you could even extrapolate that, if that's the right word, into
Yeah.
everyday occurrences. Like, and this is might be my neurosis or superstition. If I'm thinking a thought, should I go to this place or that way, and the bird flies overhead this way, I take that as a sign that no, don't go that way. I mean, is that just neurotic, or is that synchronicity?
That's the way people in cultures before the Western mind started getting around make decisions. I've heard that plenty of times.
Yeah.
I've heard the same thing.
Thank you.
Just a
Thank
couple.
you for that, because so the world, the universe then is what I think is what you're saying is always talking to us, right?
Yeah, but sometimes they're giving us the wrong idea. So you got to keep that in mind too.
What do you mean?
I mean that coincidences, synchronicities, serendipities are not commands. They're suggestions, they're guideposts. You, Alan, have to decide whether you're going to take that advice or not. You know, if you've been alive for a while, and you have been alive for a while, that sometimes the most well-meaning friend gives you some advice that is bad for you.
Yeah.
And you don't know that because they're so well-meaning. But I've had that enough times, so it's the same idea with coincidences like that.
So we still need discernment, no matter how loud the universe is talking to.
We need discernment, and the reason why, for us guys who love to have a lot of fun, and who like roller coasters and mystery and riding that sine wave and up and down,
Right.
that
Yes.
you have to have discernment, because one of the major contributions to us human beings about meaningful coincidences is they tell us how reality works.
Wait, talk about that, because how does reality work? What do you mean? How does reality
Well, the
work?
sine wave thing we just talked about,
Right.
but I talk about and very mundane, not so mundane. I'll give you an example. That's mundane, maybe, but it's survival. And just to illustrate it, a lot of Nobel Prize winners have come up with stuff. And if you ask them about how they came up with it, it was happy accidents. They just kind of happened and they were paying attention to them. So these anomalous events became something that they had to be able to think about as something that's potentially useful. So you need to have discernment to see how these particular reality works. But and even a simpler example for just us trying to live our lives, say, hey, Alan and me, my brother's name Alan, spelled differently. So me and Alan is going down into the jungle. We're going down to the jungle. This is like when there were jungles and forests, and and we were looking for something to maybe kill, to eat, because we were hungry and had to bring it back. So we see this kind of strange mark on a tree. And then we see we won't know what the animal's name is now, but an animal that's nearby where this mark on the tree was. And then we begin to see that happening a couple of times, a mark on the tree and the animal. At first, it seems like a coincidence just happening. But then we see there's a relationship between the two. You see the mark, you're probably going to see the animal. So a coincidence becomes not a coincidence when you have an explanation for it. And here there's an explanation about how reality works.
Oh, it still could be a coincidence, couldn't it? I mean, in that sense.
If you keep finding, I'll give you another example, but if you keep finding the same animal that with around that, it's not a coincidence. The animal's making the mark on the tree. That's what you end up deciding. But there's a funnier one that's kind of like, I just realized the other day, I wrote a post for Psychology Today recently called On Hearing Voices. Okay. Well, I'm a psychiatrist. I know when you hear voices, you're crazy. Well,
you know, there's a whole society about people who hear voices and aren't crazy. There's like it's in England or something.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, it got more hits than most of my posts do. It was like 30,000, which is a lot for me. And the idea there was, and maybe this group you're talking about, is if you hear a voice and the result works for you, that's not crazy.
Right.
If the psychiatrists get people in with them who are hearing voices that don't help them and make them feel crazier. But if you hear it's like we're having a motorcycle and people in emergency rooms were saying, don't ever ride a motorcycle because you're going to get really hurt, because they were seeing people who really hurt on motorcycles. But if you know how to ride them, it's less of a problem. So the same thing with hearing voices.
But you know what? Sometimes I'm going to sleep at night and I get these conversations. And if you just observe the voice without attaching to it, it's like, I don't know if I'm tuning in somewhere, it's part of the dreamscape. There's something also about dreaming I want to talk to you about, but you know, sometimes we just hear things or this mental chatter. And if we don't attach to it, I think that's another level. It's okay to hear a voice if you're not like listening to what the voice says, you know, like do this thing or something like that, because people are picking up these things all the time, but that's just a kind of psychic impulse.
I think we can hear, and that's where discernment is important.
Right.
Not attachment as part of discernment. It's like just watching it instead of having to feel like you have to respond to it.
But you know, the thing I want to talk to you about the psychosphere is like when we're falling asleep, and this is what the Aborigines told me in dream time, what they call dream time. You watch yourself fall asleep and you know you're in dream time when the images that come through your brain are new, are fresh, are not the normal recycled thing, and the things start changing. If you could observe that dream reality of the psychosphere, I mean, it's a great name for it, it's flowing through your awareness, then you can start to actually maybe even control the dream or command the dream.
Yeah, and people can do that. People can control their dreams. Yeah, there, that Schumann resonance I was telling you about, at the lower Hertz levels, around 7.8 and lower, those brain waves at that level are much more open to things happening from the psychosphere, as you're suggesting.
Right.
So that's where you can get new information. In that twilight zone, I get a lot of ideas that I have to think about and act on sometimes, or think about not acting on. So there's a lot of information that we can get in the way you're describing.
Mm. But what to do with it all? I mean, don't you still think there's some, I mean, you do a great job of explaining it and rationalizing and making sense of it, but don't you think there's magic out there in them hills? There's some.
You got to believe in magic.
No, but something inexplicable. I mean, that maybe
Yes.
we're at our level of not able to.
Yes, but what is magic? You know Aleister Crowley, probably. You heard of that guy.
Yeah.
Magic in Theory and Practice, one of those things. Magic is the ability to most efficiently make something happen. That's a practical version of it. What do you mean by magic, Alan?
I mean, we are witness, like I'll do when someone gets a remote viewing target, like I'm saying, my friend is at a particular location. Can you see exactly where he is? And someone says, yeah, he's at the base of the Great Pyramid. I mean, that might be a logical thing, but the picture shows up in that mind. And that's like a little miracle. And people are so amazed at their own ability, or I'll give you, I'll say the French synchronicity.
Yeah. Thanks.
There's a guy named Emile Duchamp.
The plum pudding one. Okay.
Yes, the plum pudding one. That's what I meant. You know that one, right?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a famous one. You want to tell it?
Yeah, well, do you want, I think he's 10 years old and he's supposed to have plum pudding at a little gathering in his family, and this guy named, what's his name? His name is Monsieur de Fontainebleau. He shows up and he gets the last piece of the plum pudding before Emile Duchamp can get it. 10 years later, he's running around Paris. He sees the sign in the window that says plum pudding. He goes in and he wants the plum pudding because he remembers that time when he was 10 years old, and he goes, oh, we just sold the last plum pudding to this Monsieur de Fontainebleau. And then years later, I don't know how many years later, 1932, the first one was 1905, then a decade later was 1805, 1850. In 1832, he's at a dinner party and he saw plum pudding on the menu. He remarks to his friend that, I don't need Monsieur Fontainebleau to be around here. Oh no, he says, I only need Monsieur Fontainebleau to be around to make this moment complete. At that moment, Monsieur Fontainebleau immediately walks into a room, arriving at the wrong address, and is given the plum pudding. So how do you explain that? That's synchronicities 27 years apart, you know?
At the right time.
At the right time. Is that just karma? I mean, of course, karma, but
I think the purpose of that one is so we can tell a very good story.
But not to Emile Duchamp. That wasn't.
Well, he was getting used to it, but it becomes a paradigmatic, and I don't know if I want to try to explain that one. I just like the story, and I think excuse me, one of the important things about coincidences is their usefulness. It's not just explanation, it's how they're being used. How do we want to use them? How do you decide to use them?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Someone says in the chat, I was born on 1/31, long before people saw 11/11, and would see a combination of those numbers everywhere, the time, recipients of license plates, and just so many synchronicities. Oh, I guess he was born in 1931, long before 11/11, but he noticed synchronicity. Oh,
All right.
it's okay. I'm with you. What about the synchronicities we witnessed in Barcelona? Oh, yeah. Well, my friend Ian, there was some kind of synchronicity with someone had a name for, he was more in on it than me, but someone had a name for a company, and then he met someone else with the same name and the same mission. But you hear that all the time, Bernie, right?
Right. We
You wanna
do.
get some water?
I have some. I think that just did it. That sneeze just did it.
Okay, I'm glad you could sneeze. So, but still, I mean, we're humans and we want to attempt to describe or explain things. But do you think it's possible that we're in psychosphere that's inexplicable
Yes, to us. I'm sorry.
to us?
I think it's inexplicable, but we can make little movements to explain it. And I can do that to some degree with the psychosphere. Having conversations like this with you are helpful because I hear your skepticism with what I'm saying, because what I have is limited.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to say I am more limited than you are in your consciousness expansion, because that ethereal mind, I think we have it going on all the time here.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm not, I mean, I like what you're saying. It's just not
Enough.
Full
It's not enough.
It's not enough because it's too strange. It's too odd. It's too, I mean, there might be attractions, like if you have an idea and someone else, or the people you write about in the book that want to meet someone and they meet someone and they're reading, there's an affinity, but it may also be a karmic thing. It's an energy thing, you know, attractions, like attracts like. It's, you see, that's what I'm saying with my UFO book. There's so much more to reality than what we've been so brainwashed to think about.
I need to
talk. Okay, you want to take a moment?
I do.
Okay, I'll just take a moment, get something to drink. I'll just add my own pin to this, and here, I'll just say, I'm talking to Bernie Beitman. Meaningful Coincidences is the name of the book, and I think it is a really excellent book. I think it is actually it is the best book I've ever read on trying to understand what this world really is all about. I mean, it is great stories in there. There's some great understanding. There's an attempt to define coincidences. It's published by, I guess this is, it's published by, what is this, Sacred Planet Books, but that's a part of, what's that big publishing company? Oh, Barron Company, Inner Traditions. It's actually an Inner Traditions book. And it really is worth going into, because just the stories alone and the research alone makes this a really valuable tool for anyone who's ever been mystified by synchronicities. This is the book to get. So how's that as a promotion, Bernie?
Alan, we're going to try to get that for a reel for Instagram.
Anything you want. Yeah, no, definitely. No, I want to support it because no one's really doing this work. Or have you found there are other people doing this work?
Nobody's done it in a systematic way the way I have. There is research going on in Europe, in academic institutes, in serendipity. That's why that's so important to know. That's why I include serendipity, because synchronicity is more in the woo-woo direction, as you might say, and the serendipity research is too much in the materialistic paradigm.
Define serendipity for people, because I always thought it's more like coincidence, but it's more specific in your.
Let's start with coincidence, Alan, because that's important. A coincidence is a neutral term. It depends on which adjective you use. You can call it a mere coincidence or only a coincidence, and it's implied that it's random. Or you can say it's an amazing coincidence or a meaningful coincidence, suggesting that there's something else going on, and we want to be able to find out what it is. So in between synchronicity and serendipity, and not in between, they're part of it, but serendipity is simply described as happy accidents, that you run into something, could be a person, and wow, that works for you.
Okay, that's serendipity. It's like not as dramatic as a synchronicity, right?
Well, synchronicity is dramatic. You like luminosity. It's like synchronicity was invented by Jung. And I like to say that synchronicity is not what Jung meant by the term. He meant an acausal connecting principle. He didn't mean meaningful coincidence, but it's come to be applied to meaningful coincidence. And with Jung's way of approaching things, he was kind of a mystic and very much a good psychologist. He was a psychiatrist. So synchronicities tend to be about spiritual, interpersonal, or psychological, while serendipity tends to be about finding things or people that you need.
The thing that bothered me about Jung's understanding is it was just named it. He didn't explain it at all the way you attempt to explain it.
That's why I think my book is really a follow-up of the seed that Jung planted with his little monograph, Synchronicity. That's a lineage. I am not a follower of Jung. I am following Jung.
Right, of course. Where does the word kismet come in?
Now that tends to be fate. And when you say, is that what you mean by kismet?
Yeah, because it sort of can be used for serendipity sometimes. Kismet.
It is. It is. It's a lot of these words have kind of their ambiguous meanings to them. Depends on who's talking about them. But the fate one is like it's already preordained, and like it's already written, and you can't help it. Is that what you mean?
Maybe that's true. Maybe that's all the synchronicities are already preordained. I'm just throwing it out there as a possibility. Could that be?
Well, how are we going to prove that?
Well, the guy with the plum pudding seemed to have something preordained or some karma or, well, is there free will or not free will, right? That's
not the right question.
It's not. What's the question?
The question is, it's relative free will, relative to the circumstances we're in. Sometimes there's nothing we can do about it. Sometimes there's nothing we can do about it. And sometimes there's a lot we can do about it. So, and there's a variability in between where using discernment, we can make a decision. So it's a continuum.
You should write a book about that. I think that's really important. Discernment is and understand discernment when the universe is trying to talk to you. How do we discern which direction? Because I use a pendulum sometimes or something.
Good, same idea.
Or a dowsing rod, because and that's the same theory I have in remote viewing, is that a part of us knows everything about everything all the time, where that's the infinite part. Would you say that?
I think that there are circumstances which allow us to think that we have a good clue on things, but to know everything with these brains is we don't have it. We have potentially contact. I think that's what you're saying. And what I'm interested in is how what you're talking about with remote viewing, you can tune into a time and place away from you, and you can resonate that image in your mind with, I'm saying, images and information and energy in the psychosphere, and kind of like tuning in with a radio or a TV, you can like get the resonant frequency from your mind to that thing and find out what you need to know.
Hey, do you want to take my remote viewing course? I'm doing it on starting October 17th for a few weeks in a row every Monday.
What time? What time?
It's going to be on the East Coast, 3 p.m. Mondays from the 17th for it's 8 weeks, but you don't have to do every week. Or you could come 1 week or.
I'd like to show up to see how you do it.
All right. Why don't you come to the first class then?
Okay. I have patients at 3:30 most days. So on Monday, so that's a bit limited, but I like the way your mind works, and I would like to get at least a holographic representation of it by showing up at least once and seeing what you're talking about.
Yeah, show up this on the 17th. That's our first class. And I don't know, I'll send you an invite to that and you could be my guest. And right, you see patients. You're not writing about synchronicity all day. You actually are a therapist, right?
Not writing about synchronicity all day. I can't. It makes me crazy, but I love it. I see patients and I go to dance and I go to the gym and I go out into the forest and talk with trees.
Okay, and the trees talk back.
It's a conversation.
Okay. How do they talk back to you? Because that's a really key point.
Telepathically.
Right. And how do you know it's the tree and this is very shamanic. I think the shamans were able to talk to plants and understand what plants were used for. So was there any training you had to do that?
No, I was walking along in Mount Tamalpais outside of San Francisco and one dusk, and I was just kind of hanging around, and I was standing next to a tree, and I said to the tree, "What are you doing here?" And the tree said, "Standing here." That sounds like a legitimate answer. The question that we all have about weird information is how much is it coming from me and how much is coming from the outside? So I've had to ask that question many times when I go to these 3 trees that I talk with in the forest near here. And one time I got an idea from them that felt like it was reverberating inside my head, like a ping pong ball going on. This wasn't from me. And then I got a confirmation of that with a coincidence further on down the trail. And then other times, my favorite one was, do you think, the trees ask, since you wonder whether you're talking to us or not, what do you think is more likely, that woman at dance really likes you or that you're talking to us?
Right.
And that was easy for me. Well, go ahead.
No, what's your answer? What was easy for you?
It was very unlikely that she liked me a lot. And it was more likely that the trees were talking with me.
But, I think it's a little bit both. When they say talking to you or it's you, it's not the limited Bernie Beitman personality. It's the bigger over self that is actually, I would, it's my guess, using the tree as a vehicle to talk, and maybe you're tuning into the consciousness of the tree, but it's you. I think you sort of say something like that in your book. It's sort of your bigger, non-local mind that's using the tree to have that conversation.
Using your terminology against non-local is a little hard for me, but using your terminology in the way you do, definitely yes. It's a more expanded mind that is making the communication.
Like, I'll give you an example in me. I was just going on a trip and, I have a pair of shoes in the corner. As I'm leaving, it sounds a little weird, but the shoes say something like I want to go or I should go. And it's like, I just get a feeling and it's like, okay, I take the shoes. And you know what? I needed those shoes on this trip and I wouldn't have taken, but I looked at the shoes and I got this feeling, and I know it couldn't be the shoes saying that. It's a part of me that's tuned in on this other level. So unless it is the shoes, and I'm really crazy, but no, we're all
you're not crazy. It's just a good story. That I'm going to use that more because I get these little things too, but that's a good one.
You're leaving and your coach says, no, I want to come along. Then it's like, it's telling you that for a reason. And
bring it along.
It's like, yeah, but I don't think it's that inanimate object. I think we don't understand who we are, basically, Bernie. That's what I think it comes down to.
Yeah, it could be a precognitive that you're seeing the future and that you're recognizing that in the future you're going to need that coat. I mean,
right. Yeah.
Pick your favorite. We don't know how it works.
No one really knows how it works.
But we get to guess about it. That's what's fun talking with you, because we're trying to guess here. We don't know, but this is the way you find stuff out.
But, getting right, I totally agree. And it's really fun. But getting to the UFO topic, I think there's something we don't know about that either. because we are been dumbed down to this level of local time space. And when we expand into this newest sphere or this psychosphere, then we'll understand what ETs are. We'll understand synchronicities. We'll understand how to play with time and space. We'll understand the use of consciousness. That's my theory. I don't know if that's true, but
no, you're right. And I would change it to not to understand. We will understand increasingly better.
Yes.
Because the whole thing is so crazy, or
mysterious
or magical. I mean,
it is. It's all that, and it's another way. I interview Deepak Chopra a lot because he's like a friend, and every time he has a new book, he says, "Want to interview me?" I say, "Sure." And I asked him to interview me about my book because I just had a book. He writes 40 to my one book, but anyway,
he doesn't do it himself, and you know that.
I don't know. I never.
He's got a group that does it. He's got a group that does it. Just
anyway,
so you know.
He's always saying it's all consciousness, and I say, Deepak, when you say it's all consciousness, you're removing it from phenomenology, from phenomena.
Very good.
And I want to keep it in the historical moment of time space. So I think we can use consciousness within the phenomenological occurrence of being to maybe control reality in a sense, maybe getting back to Aleister Crowley, maybe that's how he did it, manipulated reality because of conscious intent. I'm just guessing at that.
No, this is the best criticism I've heard of what Deepak's doing. And
I like him. He's a great guy, but when I talk to him about, making contact in the ETs, he says, "Oh, it's all consciousness." And I said, "No, let's not take it outside of history. Let's not get historical, not ahistorical, because if you do that, then of course that's the baseline. Of course it's all consciousness. But what are we going to do about that? Is do maybe what you're doing is attempting to work with the modalities of synchronicity in time space somehow."
Which is another way of saying I'm working with the phenomenology. I'm working with the phenomena. And that's such a nice short way of saying what I'm trying to do as well. And what bothered me about Deepak's, it's all consciousness.
I think that's good for people who just are so self-absorbed in their personality, don't get that they are. But once you know your consciousness, then what are we going to do about it? Then we're going to try to work with it within the confines of the personality and the historical movement in order to make something great happen, right?
Right on. That's what I'm doing. Right on, right there with the coincidence thing. Right on.
Thanks. The other thing that when you were talking about those strange things that you notice that come up, I forgot what you were saying, but it reminds me of the story of what's his name who invented LSD. I mean, we're old hippies.
Sure,
Hoffman.
He didn't invent it. He stumbled on it. It was an accident.
Yes, yeah. He stumbled on it, and then it was an accidental little drop that went, and he had this thing. And then, of course,
riding his bicycle back home was never the same. You got it.
The bicycle Dave was saying, "Oh, I'm going to actually intentionally take this." And of course, he had the best bicycle ride. But I mean, I'm not recommending that because
no,
I think we're way beyond the LSD vibration. I think we can tap into those realms through the higher cognitive abilities of the frequencies that are now coming into the planet. I know that's a little woo-woo, but
no, it's not woo-woo. It's necessary.
Tell me when I get woo-woo then.
It's not woo-woo. My what I do is come along saying, I'm a psychiatrist, I know reality. I mean, I can do that. And I can say that the energies coming in are required now because we're doing a self-destructive thing to ourselves and our planet and the other living beings on this planet. And there has to be new energy coming up. And I'm looking to see if the UFOs are communicating to us, not just the to how to harm ourselves, which some of them may be doing, but how we can get out of this. And they may be communicating in symbols rather than language, that semiotic idea we talked about earlier.
I think they are. I think that's actually, I use that in my book. I talk about poiesis in my book, which is like where you making things happen, where you're creating realities, and they're influencing us in some ways to think more symbolically, to be less linear, be more multifaceted. My favorite quote about UFOs is from John Mack. Did you know John Mack? Do you know who he is?
Only of him. He was dead by the time I heard about him.
Oh, what an amazing person. I knew him, and
Wow.
What a brilliant, probably the best mind we've had in the UFO field. Actually, in my book, there's a previously unpublished essay by John Mack that I asked his archivist for, and his family gave me permission to print this. And it reads like it could have been written yesterday. I mean, it was 20 years old, but it's get my book.
When's your book come out?
It just came out last year. It's St. Martin's Publishing. St. Martin's
Oh, that's
Press.
a good press. That's a really good press.
It was, and it's done really well because it came out at a time where the government was releasing its preliminary assessment about UFOs, and they weren't getting any answers there. So this is an anthology of what I call the best and brightest minds in the UFO field. Linda Moulton Howe, Whitley Strieber, what's his name? Grant Cameron, JJ and Desiree Hurtak. These are Nick Pope. They're all, it's a compilation, because, you know, what I keep hearing about UFOs is that no one has the whole story, not the government, not the scientists, not the pilots, not the So the only way to make sense of this is we have a mosaic and put all the pieces together. And you still might not get the elephant, but you'll get a piece that fits together.
Do you do that synthesis at the end?
I do it throughout the book. Yeah, actually, the introduction, I say it goes from the inner to the outer, and I let the reader make the synthesis, because if I make the synthesis, it's still my subjective mind. But if you get all the pieces, then you, Bernie, you put it together. I'll send you a PDF of it if you want. Or
I want more than that. I want a hard copy of it, and I want to interview you on my podcast.
Oh, I'd love that. Thank you. We'll talk about semiotics on there and the nature of symbolic reality and what this world really means. Yeah, anytime I'm available for that. Absolutely.
Wonderful. I booked till December, but we'll get a time. I have your email address, so I'm going to suggest a time to you, and I want to get a hard copy because I prefer them to reading PDFs.
I'll send you a hard copy. Yes, I'll get my people. Send me your address or something.
I'll email that to you. I'll email that to you. So we'll continue this conversation. We will continue this.
I do appreciate your efforts in trying to understand it. I think there's so much more to do on the subject, you know.
To end, since I got to see a patient in a little bit.
Okay, yeah.
Synchronicity is a portal to higher dimensions, and it's more accessible under the term meaningful coincidence to a larger population. So I'm trying to get a larger population to think about weird phenomena, like think of somebody and they call you, and slowly help them get to a higher consciousness through their own direct experience of synchronicity rather than somebody telling them.
Perfect way to end. You know, it's like that is a great summation. It is about higher consciousness, and it's somehow about the mind. I mean, I know you have to go, but it just reminded me of the thought experiment where you stare at the back of someone's head and they turn around. This is Sheldrake's thing.
Sheldrake.
So
there's a lot of weird stuff going on right here, Alan. That's what I'm tuned into.
I know you found your dog that way, and that's in the book. Get the book, Meaningful Coincidences. Bernie Beitman,
Beitman, I'll get you straight. It's Beitman.
Yeah. Sorry, Beitman. And tonight it's Yom Kippur. How do you like
That's
that?
why
Is
I
that
got to
a
see the patient and go to Yom Kippur services.
Oh, okay, I think I'll do that too.
Kol
I think
Nidre.
I'll do-
I love to get to Kol Nidre. So
I
that's
think
what
the Kol Nidre is probably the most sacred time in the whole Jewish thing. Not that I'm religious, but I think that
It-
is a sacred moment.
it's what a feeling. Say it 3 times for the guys who show up late. So you'll be
Yeah.
there. You'll be there.
Thanks for your time, and we'll do it
Thank you
again.
for your energy and the fun talking with you. And we will be continue again. I will send you my address, and I'll suggest the time that we can get together.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks everyone for tuning online, and subscribe to this YouTube channel and take out a super chat. And I'll see you soon. I'm going to disconnect us. Thanks.